Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mongabay's webinar series for journalists. I'm your host and moderator, Mike ʻAuamo, and I'm broadcasting to you live from Gadigal Land in the Eora Nation. So this webinar is viewable on both YouTube and LinkedIn, and it will remain on YouTube after this broadcast is over. So please do subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can be notified when this webinar is edited and when our next one is going to be announced. And you can also get notifications about our webinar series from our newsletter, which you can subscribe to on mongabay.com. So today's webinar topic is how to cover coral reefs. And I must say, this probably couldn't come at a more urgent time as the worst coral bleaching event on record just hit. So I will reserve some time at the end of this webinar for audience questions as time allows. And so if you think of a question during this discussion today, go ahead and drop it in on the chat on the platform you're tuning in on, and I will save it and I'll bring it up at the end of the discussion. As a reminder, we here at Mongabay are always looking for your pitches. So if you have a story idea that you think of while watching today, go to mongabay.org, click on opportunities, and then find the page, pitch Mongabay a story, and follow the instructions from there. But we always encourage you to pitch your story idea to other outlets if you're not going to pitch it to us. So I'm going to briefly introduce our wonderful panelists today, and then we'll move on to our questions, starting with first, Basten Gokkon. So Basten is a Jakarta-based senior staff writer for Mongabay. He writes about marine and fisheries issues, but his beats also include human rights, wildlife conservation, public health, and their intersections. Next, joining us is Brenda Lima. Brenda was raised in Waipio. She began volunteering for Paipai o Heia at a Heia fish pond during holiday breaks from Occidental College, where she received a BA in biology with a marine biology emphasis. She also has a marine science degree from Hawaii Pacific University. Brenda joined the KUA team in September 2013, and her primary kuleana is to coordinate opportunities for local IA practitioners to network and increase restoration efforts. And so also joining us is Israel Muñiz. Israel is currently the Marine Science Officer at the Healthy Reefs Initiative. He is a marine ecologist focused on analyzing spatial and temporal changes in tropical marine ecosystems. He has experience in ecological data analysis and geographic information systems. His major interests are identifying drivers of change, developing early warning systems for ecological risks, ecological restoration, and conservation of coral reefs. So just to recap, we'll be giving each panelist an opportunity to address about 10 questions that we're going to go through today. And then we'll be holding roughly 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for your questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So it's worth recapping the many diverse values of coral reefs. So panel, can you summarize coral reefs' critical role in nature, culture, and economic systems? And anyone is willing to chime in. Israel, is that?
Yeah, I can go first if you want, of course.
Okay.
So some important things about coral reefs is that this ecosystem cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, yet support about 25% of all marine species. So they are really productive and really efficient ecosystems. We need to learn a lot of things about coral reefs because they have an amazing use of the resources. So, and over 1 billion of people around the world depend on reefs for food and coastal protection and income for tourists, for example. And the global value of reef service and solutions that they offer to us is on order of hundreds of billions of dollars each year, approximately. So they are really awesome ecosystems.
Thanks very much, Israel. Anyone else?
Sure, I can say something. What's very interesting about Indonesia is that it houses the Pacific Coral Triangle, right? And we know how diverse it is, how rich in biodiversity it is, in marine biodiversity it is. So the fact that Indonesia has this region where it falls under its authority, Indonesia should play a bigger role in protecting it. And Indonesia also relies so much on tourism. So I would say the coral reefs in Indonesia play a very big role in for its nation. But also, I need to also mention that we have a lot of coastal communities. Indonesia is one of the largest archipelagic country in the world, if not the largest. So the coastal communities will benefit so much, from coral reefs. So yeah.
Thank you, Basten.
That's so awesome. I would love to chime in on the culture aspect then. I think for Hawaii, coming from Hawaii here, and for many other island people, like Bastian said, at least here in Hawaii, coral is recognized as the first form of life to emerge from the darkness, from the primordial slime. Our creation chant recognizes coral as that foundational ancestor. And so I think from that aspect, and it still relates to everything that Israel and Bastian said too, as a foundation of life for the ocean and for humans too, as descendants of Koa.
Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to move on to talking about threats. So, since the start of 2023, the world has been enduring the fourth and the biggest global coral bleaching event on record, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Almost 84% of the world's coral reefs have been exposed to bleaching level heat stress during that time. And since the 1950s, roughly half of the world's coral reefs have been lost. So, panel, what are the main threats to coral reefs? Is there any global context, like what I just mentioned, that you think that journalists should be highlighting in each story? Things like pollution, industrial overfishing, or climate change?
Okay, I can go first if you want. Yeah, as you mentioned, it was a really bad year, 2023 and 2024 and 2025 still. So this is an historical, really bad event for coral reefs. It was the higher heat stress events in 2023, at least in the Mesoamerican reef, and we saw a lot of mortality because of that heat stress and that coral bleaching event. But that is not the only thing that we need to keep in mind, because ocean pollution is a silent killer for coral reefs too. And I think that in the case of the Caribbean coral reefs, that threat could be more important sometimes, because that's a chronic issue that we have all the time. So I think that wastewater treatment and other solutions need to be focused for that, because if we have synergy between different threats, that could be a really bad scenario for coral reefs. And for example, ocean pollution could lead to other coral diseases or more coral bleaching in some cases. So, and another thing is that overfishing could be really bad, because if we lose some of the key species that we have, such as groupers or parrotfish, we are losing some of the most important engineers of this ecosystem. So I think those three are, for me, the most relevant threats right now. So it's climate change, especially ocean warming, ocean pollution, and overfishing are maybe those.
Thank you, Israel. And Basten or Brenda, do you have anything to add? Yeah.
I guess beyond the like technical threats that Israel spoke to a little bit, I think what what people and communities talk about here is kind of the overarching or underlying misalignment of values and priorities and policy that leads to the mismanagement of resources that impact reefs, like the one that he mentioned, wastewater management. I think it's just the disconnect of human actions on land and not seeing the impacts on our nearshore waters and reefs, I think is like kind of a thread that goes between all of these specific threats that can be pulled out more, I guess. And then also, at least in Hawaii, and I'm sure in many other places, just a lack of sustainable financing for the effective management and the ways that we're trying to address those kinds of threats.
Yeah, I think I'd like to highlight the industrial pollution part of it. In Indonesia, for example, there's a lot of coastal infrastructure projects that are happening, and oftentimes they're not necessarily taking into account how it will affect the coastal coral reefs, right? And then on top of that, I think some like fishing activities, when they're using like huge nets, you know, and they get entangled. These are more I would say underreported threats that are probably damaging the coral reefs in Indonesia.
Thank you very much, panel. Great. Those are great insights. We're going to move on to the impacts and the consequences. So what are some of the most important or perhaps underreported consequences of losing coral reefs that journalists should really be focusing on and covering?
I can start, I guess, because it's about reporting, right? I think I would love to see more that connection between, the importance of coral ecosystem to human life, how coral ecosystem can sustain humans' life. And I think that starts from, the fact that they are housing fishes, it goes to sustaining fish stock, and the fact that as humans we source our protein from seafood as well. So I think I would love to see more of that connection, because I think what we're missing sometimes, and I hope I've been doing a good job in like trying to connect all the links between our marine ecosystem and our life on land. So yeah, I think I would love to see more of that, because I feel like the power in stories is about encouraging people, or at least raising awareness about, so that we know more about what we need to protect, right? Especially regarding our marine ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here because I was thinking something similar too, about just the richness of stories and how that really draws people in, and how for coastal communities especially, there are like generational stories about the way that families and communities have relationships with reefs. And I think the part of the impact that is lost in coverage right now is that emotional connection, and yeah, that human aspect of the relationship to reefs.
Yeah, I completely agree. Maybe, yeah, cultural heritage is another, is really important, and is an undervalued casualty probably, because, for example, in the Mesoamerican Reef, we have a lot of coastal indigenous communities like the Garífonas in Honduras, and Guatemala and and Belize, sorry, and in the case of Guatemala and Mexico, the Mayan people, they are really connected to the Mesoamerican reef, and they have really nice stories about the past of these ecosystems and how they see this ecosystem right now and how they suffer for the degradation, right? So that could be an important topic. And the other thing is that maybe the loss of the biomedical resources could be another interesting story, because coral reefs are like medicine cabinets. You know, we have sponges and corals that produce unique compounds that could be used in cancer treatments, in anti-inflammatories, antibiotics, and a lot of things. So yeah, those two. And the other thing is food security, but I think that is like normal news. But yeah, thanks.
Great insights, everyone. So our next question, my next question actually is directed towards you, Brenda. So as Israel, mentioned earlier, approximately 1 billion people rely on coral reefs for their livelihoods, and coastal communities are incredibly diverse. So Brenda, could you speak to the importance of reefs in your community in particular? What are the most important considerations and lines of inquiry for journalists when they engage with coastal communities, including indigenous peoples who directly depend on coral reefs?
Yeah, thanks. I think this question is so great. And I started talking about it a little bit, but I think really the really rich lines of inquiry that journalists could follow are those stories that have the layers of time and history of people in place. There are communities in Hawaii that have specific names for a whole fringing reef, for every particular curve of a reef, every little sandy bottom patch, every shallow stretch of a beach. And people have stories to tell about what their elders taught them about how to behave around those spaces, how to behave around places that were recognized as nursery areas for juvenile fish, how to behave and fish properly for specific species in specific seasons. And those varied at a scale across different valleys and different watersheds in Hawaii. And so that specific knowledge of place and species is so place-based, and there's just so much richness in that detail of scale. And so I think a lot of coverage just misses that, and really could illuminate better that relationship of people to place again. And for indigenous communities especially, I think what we want to uplift and uplift more through media is the desire of people to continue those practices and perpetuating the knowledge that has passed down to them. And against many kind of socioeconomic and policy barriers, another thing that could be uplifted is the resilience of communities and families and groups of people who are finding creative ways in contemporary policy to perpetuate that place-based knowledge and to implement tools of managing fisheries and caring for reef resources within the kind of institutional structures of today, knowing that for many indigenous communities there were traditional hierarchies and rules and ways that our natural resources were cared for generations. And it's like the resilience of carrying that into the future is something that really could be uplifted more.
Brenda, thank you so much. I know I directed this question to Brenda primarily, but Basten or Israel, are there any lines of inquiry specific to your locations that you think more people could be examining in terms of coastal communities and the people that rely on reefs where you are both from?
Yeah. Oh, go, Basten, if you want.
Oh, thank you. I think this I want to direct this question actually to public officials, because I feel like because they hold so much power, right? And I think in Indonesia, especially, the public officials they see coastal communities and specifically to like coral reefs area, they see it as another way to exploit and capitalize on, and they see it as another opportunity to make as much, I don't know, state income or whatever, and by doing that they're devaluing a lot of the um, um, a lot of the like benefits of coral reefs, right? So I think I want to try to be more, yeah, I think I hope that public officials would see like coastal areas, coral reefs for example, as an opportunity to benefit in a lot of ways except exploitation. I don't know if that answered your questions, but
No, that's a great insight. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree with both. And I think that we need to cover reef justice and not just reef science, right? We need to know and how these coastal and indigenous people who are being squeezed between climate change impacts and tourist driven development in some places, they are suffering for all these drivers. So, and they know really well this ecosystem more than us. So, yeah, I agree with this.
Thank you, everyone. My next question is kind of a big picture question, I suppose, and we've already sort of touched upon a lot of really vital stories that were quite specific to a lot of different topics. But what are the most important stories on coral reefs that journalists should be covering today, and why? What are some key insights or questions that they should consider when delving into these stories?
yeah, I'll start. I think it's just the fact that when we're covering marine issues, there's no boundaries, right? Everything is connected, even more so compared to, like, for example, terrestrial issues. When we talk about forests, you can just hone in, like focus and zoom in on like one particular area. For example, like the rainforest in Kalimantan or Sumatra, for example, right? But when we talk about marine ecosystem and maybe corals, I think the point of view should also be switched. It's no longer, we shouldn't be using what do you call it? Like our set of eyes should be considering the fact that there's no lines. There's, of course, there's ZE and all those things, but eventually those fish, those marine life, they don't see those lines. They don't separate themselves from each other. So I think if I remember correctly, there was a study saying that some of the coral reefs in Indonesia are connected through sort of like a network with the coral reef somewhere else. But I'm trying to find it, that study, but I can't. But I remember it. I remember reading it.
Thank you very much, Basten. Israel or Brenda, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that is a really good question, and I don't know, but we could have different answers. And in the case of science, we have a lot of novel things that are really important for journalists and could be awesome for the people and the public in general. But in the case of good news, I think that we need to cover the regional coordination and community-based innovation happening in different regions around the world, right? So especially in the face of growing threats. And for example, in the Mesoamerican Reef, we have a really good collaboration with different partners, and that's a really nice and positive story. And other thing is that maybe we need to cover climate resilience as a cultural and political process, and not just as a technical tool for climate change and other impacts, right? Because well, the reef future depends not only on coral nurseries or solar panels or technology and science, but on collective governance and indigenous and community leadership. So I think those kind of stories are interesting for me, at least.
Yeah, just one last thing to add. I think it's like the complexity of these ecosystems is a reason why they are impacted by so many threats from all different directions, spatial and kind of like human use impact directions. And then the other side of that coin, I think, is like Israel just said, the need for collaboration and understanding them as complex systems, and that we have to approach them in those multi-pronged ways, collaborating across all the layers of governance, local governance, and across our you know, man-made political borders, and kind of like up and down through all of the layers of our human communities.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Does anyone have anything else to add before we move on to our next question? No. So this one is directed at you, Israel, though we can certainly direct it towards other people too. So, Israel, as a marine scientist, what do you think journalists should be paying close attention to when covering coral reef solutions? Things like, you know, different forms of protection, conservation, or restoration. And what are some underreported advances of success stories that journalists should be looking into?
Really good question, Mike. And well, I think right now, in general, there is a dangerous myth that we can fix coral reefs, right? And with technology alone. And coral gardening and artificial instructors and all these technologies are really good for a special case and make headlines, but these efforts are often tiny compared to the scale of reef loss right now. And they can distract from the hard truth. And so we need to focus in other things. So, for example, in the case of coordination and collaboration, and we need to focus in these kind of solutions and conservation, right? So a major underreported success in the region, for example, in the Mesoamerican reef, is the legal protection of different kind of species. I think is a really good tool. And for example, the parrotfish are now protected in all the 4 countries. And this is really good for the Mesoamerican reef. And we have actually other species under protection right now. And there are other tools like Not Take Zone, managed by local communities. So this could help to a better resilience and recovery of fish population. So those 2 tools are great. And also we need to look to co-management innovation. So for example, managed access program of restoring fish biomass through community enforcement, for example, or some blue economy models such as the Blue Bond that is working in Belize right now, and maybe some marine spatial planning considering indigenous people such as the Garifuna territories. And we have other tools, like some financial tools like parametric insurance for hurricanes or for coral bleaching. So maybe we need to use all those in combination with coral restoration, but coral restoration is working more in a local scale. So we need to think in other innovations and conservation strategies.
Great. Thank you very much, Israel. And we're actually going to talk about restoration quite a bit more on the next question. But before we get to that, Brenda or Basten, do you both have any insights about solutions that are underreported in your regions?
Well, I'm not sure that they're underreported, because I think they're getting more attention, rightly so. I think a lot of the great successes that communities have advocated for recently that we're starting to see play out is kind of like a strong community involvement in tourism management, just the access of the volume of tourists coming to places that end up impacting reefs. There are a couple of good examples that are just a few years, like starting to see positive results in Hawaii. And then also we're only just a couple of years into the state of Hawaii implementing an ocean user fee that is administered through commercial operators. And I think that's just an example of trying to mitigate and do restoration work and do resilience work related to reefs, like from the revenues that tourists bring to Hawaii.
Thank you, Brenda. Basten, did you have anything to add?
I think I want to extend that to the fact that some of these solutions, especially that's related to marine conservation, are very expensive, right? They need a lot of funding, and in Indonesia's context, foreign aid cuts from the United States government that have impacted so much in a lot of the projects being stalled or even shut down, and these are great projects. These are potentially going to do good for the coral reefs in Indonesia. So, I think I just want to highlight that as an extension of that conversation about, reef solutions.
Really good point there, Basten. Thank you for sharing. So our next question, as I mentioned earlier, is going to focus on reef restoration. It's a pretty hot topic, but given the growing severity of global heating, some experts say restoration is only a small-scale temporary solution in the face of climate change and likely can't scale up to combat global degradation. So how should journalists be approaching stories on restoration? What might reporters miss or misunderstand when covering this?
Again, I'll start because it's related to reporting. I think I would say greenwashing. Like that's a huge red flag, right? Like you don't want to be covering a reef restoration project that's just it's just like a program. It's not. There's no actual long-term benefit to it. It's just another CSR program. And however good that is, I feel like we need to be careful about promoting some of those stuff, right? And I think I also want to add that like just basically trivializing coral reef as a tourism destination. Like because I've seen many like reef restoration project with a huge priority for like focusing more on like this could be a next tourism destination or attraction for people. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Basten. Israel or Brenda, did you have anything to?
Yeah, I think that we need to keep in mind the big picture when we are writing about coral restoration, and we need to know the scale that all these projects are working right now, and we need to focus on that and be really clear and objective of what is they are doing. And I know that some of these are really interesting, and in some cases we can think that those techniques could save coral reefs, but that is not true. And we should caution readers that coral restoration, while helpful, is mostly in a small scale right now. So even some coral scientists call it an expensive distraction. So, and I think that coral restoration is good in some cases. So, for example, in the case of Belize, we have a really good example. Fragments of Hope is called it, and they are working with local communities. They have a really nice program. But yeah, journalists should also scrutinize the greenwashing part of all these projects, because some of those could be, as Basten already mentioned it, really weird tourism kind project, right? So yeah, we need to be aware of all this.
Thank you very much, Israel. Brenda, did you have anything to add on this topic? No? Okay, we're going to move on to our next one, and this question is for you, Basten, or at least it's initially directed at you here. So based on your experience as a journalist, what are some key lessons or like major do's and don'ts that you can share with other journalists when reporting on reefs?
Ooh, that's a great question. But I think I've mentioned it before in this webinar. I think one is you definitely need to come with a different point of view. It's like you need to understand that marine ecosystem is a different game, or not game, but like yeah, it requires a different approach. When you talk about corals, you cannot not think about fishers. You cannot not think about the coastal community. So everything is much more connected, I feel like. And so yeah, just you need to approach it differently than when you're covering forests, for example, or land use. So yeah, and then second one is, yeah, as I said, like trivializing coral reefs or like coastal ecosystem as just another like way of another option for tourism, right? And yeah, I think also need to pay respect to the coastal communities. Think of them as someone who not own, but like they have so much connection, so much relationship with their with the coastal ecosystem. So think of them as not only a source, but someone that can sustain future for not just themselves, but also everyone else. Yeah.
Thank you, Basten. And of course, this question is very much applicable to the sectors and line of work that you both work in, Brenda and Israel. So please do feel free to share some do's and don'ts that you have for reporters.
I guess the thing that comes to mind about don'ts is I think we often see that those coastal residents and longtime families and lineal descendants of communities that have those relationships with reef ecosystems, the knowledge that they carry and share when they are featured in coverage, I feel like sometimes can be portrayed as like anecdotal or just stories they've heard or things they observed in their life or things their elders told them, but not given the depth and weight that knowledge really holds. And I think journalists often are, well, it seems like they have to balance many sources of knowledge, right? But I think we continue to all get better at recognizing the value of that knowledge of people in their places and the expertise of those practitioners in those places.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Israel, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and maybe some other things that I could add is that keep an objective view and take into account different perspective. If you are writing about coral restoration, for example, ask coral restoration expert, but ask to other coral reef scientists, or maybe indigenous people working in the area or living in that area, in order to have a better picture of that situation, right? So yeah, that's
Great. Thank you, everybody. Our next question has to do with something that Israel brought up earlier. It's bioprospecting, which is like the sampling of corals for medical research or biotech research. And they can have benefits such as human medical breakthroughs, but this can come with some technical and ethical concerns, of course. So what are the main concerns there? What are some key considerations for indigenous peoples and local communities when research is being conducted in their waters?
Well, I can go first if you want. I think that the main question here is who is benefiting from these discoveries. So are the scientists or the biomedical firms partnering with local university or indigenous knowledge holders, or just mining the reef for profit? I think that is probably the main ethical issue that we could have. And some studies actually warn of biopiracy or something like that. It's kind of a conspiracy, but biological, mostly because of exploitation, when the rules are ignored and when local communities and local scientists are ignored, because not just the indigenous people, but actually the local people are important in this case. So yeah, I think coverage should highlight how fair benefit sharing agreements and are required for this, and reporters need to ensure indigenous rights are front and center. And yeah, I think those are important in the case of ethical and local communities relation.
Thank you, Israel. Brenda or Basten, did you have anything to add to this?
I think, yeah, we have this term called free prior informed consent, right? FPIC. So I think I just want to brought that up for like to make sure that it's being implemented correctly. And I guess full transparency. It's I think it's applicable in every sector. It can be for anything. But so when you talk about again, yeah, bringing it up, the exploitation of reef ecosystem, I think, yeah, just full transparency. Who is it for? Is going to benefit, and then the involvement of local communities, indigenous communities, and coastal communities. They need to be not only centered, but also they need to be they should be on the like top priority. Like they need to be in the leadership level, not just being involved, but they need to make the initiative. They need to make they need to be the ones who are calling the shots, for example. So yeah, I think that should be good to like take into account.
Thank you, Basten. Brenda, did you have anything to share about this topic?
Nothing really different from what they shared, only that in some places communities also have histories of being burned by their own universities and their own local academic and regulatory institutions. And so I think what they both said about prioritizing the people of the place is really the right thing, because the protective layers that institutions sometimes put in place aren't always effective.
It's a really good point. So yeah, I definitely would love to see more stories highlight that and bring that to light. So we're going to talk about some resources that reporters should be utilizing in their reporting, or ones that you recommend. One that that I'm familiar with is the Allen Coral Atlas. It's a map of the world's coral reefs and their threats. We've highlighted it a lot here at Mongabay, and I'll link that in the show notes of this. But what are some other resources or tools that are really helpful for journalists when they're covering reefs that you really want people to look at? And what are some organizations or sources that you would encourage reporters to utilize and consider?
I think that's a really good question, and that depends of the place that you are interested. Because, for example, in the case of the Caribbean, we have great resources. So we have an organization that is called AGRA, is Atlantic Gulf and Reef Rapid Assessment, and they have a really nice web page with a lot of information about some coral diseases, such as the stony coral tissue loss disease and coral bleaching and Dairima died off, and other kind of resources that you can find there. We have other things such as the Coral Reef Watch program in the NOAA, for example, for coral bleaching. So you can find a lot of news about coral bleaching, heat stress around the world in that place. And well, in the case of the organization that I work in, we have some resources for the Mesoamerican reef. So you can look at healthy reefs for healthy people. For example, if you want to see some report cards about the change in the coral reefs in the region, and you can have the same for different regions. You can find a lot of report cards for other places too. So I think those resources are good. And then we have the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. They are a really big group of experts that work in the assessment of coral reefs around the world. So if you want to know how the coral cover is changing, that is a really good resource too.
Thank you very much, Israel. And Brenda or Basten, did you have any other resources to share?
Sure. Yeah, I think again, bringing up the Coral Triangle Center, the Coral Triangle in Indonesia. Well, the Coral Triangle is not it's not in Indonesia only, but yeah, we have an organization called Coral Triangle Center, and so they are really trying to just like promote the conservation of marine biodiversity and sustainable management of marine and coastal resources in the Coral Triangle. So that's a really good network to have, and also Reef Check Indonesia. And then there's one about there's one called Fisheries Resource Center of Indonesia, where they're doing this research to put a value of Indonesia's marine resources. So that includes coral reefs as well. And so they're doing what they call as open account, or like ocean account. It's called ocean account. So they just want to. So going back to your first question, Mike, they want to sort of like put an actual nominal value to the marine resources that we have in Indonesia. I feel like that's a good start, because that also it also is trying to answer the big question in Indonesia that we face, which is lack of data, right? Data efficiencies is a huge problem in terms of like trying to manage not only fisheries resources, but also the coral ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Basten.
I don't have any cool specific things to offer like they do, but the thing that comes to mind actually is a lot of amazing resources in Hawaii have come from Hawaiian language newspapers and other archival sources of information about these places throughout the islands. And a growing resource of oral history accounts. And so I would think just that creative perspective of being able to tell stories about reefs and the importance of coral and coral reefs, like that's a that's a really intriguing angle that many of us love to incorporate in our work.
That is a great insight, Brenda, and thank you for sharing that. Just to let everyone know, all these resources they just said, I'm going to share them in the show notes and link them. So if you missed anything that anyone said, don't worry, it'll be in there. We have some time left before we get to a couple of audience questions we have. And so I wanted to take this moment to give the panel here a chance to address anything that they feel did not get addressed during the main panel. Is there any topic or anything, any point or tidbit of data that you want to share with our audience that you really feel is important that we didn't get to cover?
Yeah, I think I want to go back to the fact that, these marine conservation projects are very expensive and they need a lot of funding. And like, for example, in Indonesia, the budget for, we have what we call Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources, Marine Affairs. Their budget is only like a small amount of the state budget, right? And they have to set aside out of that budget for conservation projects in marine ecosystems. And so it's really not enough. It's really, it's eye-opening when you see the fact that you don't have the money to fund projects that are going to help so much of the, the marine ecosystem. So I just want to maybe call on everyone who's watching, maybe they can, put a bit pressure on their government, their respective officials to maybe, consider helping out, countries where, they're doing great work in terms of like marine protection. So yeah, maybe that.
Great. Thank you very much, Basten. And Israel or Brenda, did you have anything that you wanted to highlight that you didn't get to chat about?
Well, yeah, maybe that, some recommendation for the public in general is that all of us could help coral reefs from different actions. So maybe the most important in a personal or individual way is the pattern of consumption. Sorry, my English. But yeah, we need to keep in mind that we don't need a lot of things and we don't need to eat beef all the week. We could eat beans for weeks, and that's better for coral reefs and for ecosystem in general. So yeah, we need to keep in mind that that the patterns of consumption are really important, maybe more than other actions. So, and that's something that all of us can do.
That's a really good one, Israel. Thank you.
Mike, I thought of something. Maybe it didn't occur to me in the last question about resources, but my apologies, my internet has been bad because I'm like in the middle of this Pacific Islands chapter of a fisheries conference here, and so I'm borrowing someone's hotel room. But I'm speaking in a session tomorrow about kind of like a guidebook that our local division of aquatic resources has developed about kind of like incorporating cultural foundations into the work of managing marine resources here. And then what I'm sharing about is kind of like a process that our organization developed in collaboration with the Sea Grant program here in Hawaii about building good reciprocal researcher and community relationships. And I think that can apply to journalism as well, just and bioprospecting as well, and all the things that we've been talking about.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Personally speaking, something that if I was interested I actually personally would be interested to see more reporting on people examining the systems that put pressure, the consumption systems that put pressure on reef ecosystems, kind of piggybacking off of what Israel just said, like, because obviously we can all individually curb our consumption, but what are the systems in place that make that difficult for us? and what could be done to reform those systems to then in turn benefit coral reef ecosystems. I would be really curious to see reporting done on that, and particularly in places where that are experiencing massive tourism pressure. That would be something that I would be curious to see. Well, with that said, we're going to move on to our audience questions. We do have a couple, and if you're watching right now and you have a question for our panel, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. But I'm going to bring up our first question here, and this is from a gentleman named Fritz. And Fritz says, hello, how would you address parachute science?
That's a great question. And well, the first one is involve local scientists and local communities. I think that's easy. If you get some funds from Europe or US, invite the Mexican, invite the Guatemalan, and all the people that is working in the area, because they know better the area. They are living there. They are doing their job in that place. So I think that's the easy part. Then we need to share leadership, and in the case of science, we need to share authorships too. So we need to invite the people to collaborate with us, and it's better and in all ways. So I think that's, and the other thing is that in some countries like Mexico or like Guatemala or Honduras or Belize even, we need to build better capacity for the universities, for the research centers, and that could be another solution, I think.
Thank you very much, Israel. Does anyone have anything to add to that really good question?
I think in addition to those good things that Israel said, in terms of collaborating with local scientists and communities, I think it's like an issue of trying to answer the questions that the people of that place have about the resources, and just trying to prevent starting new projects or starting new lines of inquiry, really like plugging into work that likely has been going on for decades and contributing to the efforts that are ongoing in places. I think that takes like a certain sense of humility, trying to not do something like novel, and again, like that reciprocity with a place that researchers might be spending just a portion of their life in.
Thank you for sharing, Brenda. And Basten, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm not a scientist, so but I think we face this similar situation. We call it parachute reporting, right? But I don't know. I think I just reminded of this. Like I went to West Papua in Raja Ampat, where I was talking to the young people there, and some of them are so inspired to become a marine scientist because they wanted to, because of the the projects or the programs that are happening in their in their community. But yeah, I think one way to address it is just really by involving the youth as well, right? Because they're the next generation. They're the ones who are going to do more. So that way the connection becomes more connected. That's not a good word. That's like the relationship becomes more connected. Like if we're only involving like I'm not saying the old people, but like certain generations. So we can start with the youth because it becomes an inspiration. Because I was so touched by like some young people when I talk to them, and they're like, because the researchers is from our community, and I want to be inspired to do that for my own community. So I think that's a great way.
That's a really Great insight there, Basten. We are getting quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and prioritize them. But our next one is from Kevin Chang at Kua. And Kevin asks, how do community relations with their reefs and places lend to telling these stories?
I'll go first. I work with Kevin. Kevin, you missed the beginning part. I think the relations part is really the key thing. There are, and I think it's not unique to Hawaii, but the perspective of reefs being an extension of our islands, I think is something that could be adopted on continents as well. You know, the idea that that holistic scale of our relationship to the coastal areas, to the deep waters, as a way to relate to our natural world, and the way that that can be manifested in stories of physically feeding ourselves through food, but also feeding our spirits, by like reigniting that relationship with the natural world. I think, like I said earlier about that line of inquiry that could really emphasize the storytelling of our human relationships more. I think could just like give a lot more life to coverage around coral reefs, which I think for people who don't live in coastal areas, maybe it just seems like a whole nother world. And because we all work in it and maybe grew up in it, I like can't fathom that, but I have to remind myself that yeah, there's a certain whole segment of our human population that doesn't have that relationship to reefs, and how to bring that to life.
Great. Thank you, Brenda. Does anyone have anything to add to that before I get to some of the other questions? Kevin has asked a couple questions. I'm going to go ahead and get to another audience members, and I'll come back to you, Kevin. But I just want to highlight this one from Climate Spotlight. Can someone speak on the importance of coral health monitoring? How that data is fed back into decision making?
That's a great question. And yeah, I think that if we want to change something or preserve something, we need to assess that, right? So we need to know how that is changing, how is the recovery of that system or unit or whatever you are working on. But in the case of coral reefs, they are really complex ecosystem with really difficult and prediction of those changes, because we don't know when a new coral disease could happen, for example, and we can lose more than 80% of the coral cover in some places, and not only coral cover, but actually coral diversity and the functions of all these ecosystems. So we need to measure that. And in the case of the Mesoamerican reef, I think that because of a good collaboration that we have in the region, all these data have a really important, I don't know how do you say, like really important in decision making. It's really important into decision making, because the government look at the report card, or they sometimes ask for the data because they want to know how is the parrotfish population, and if a new law is good or not, and maybe if they need to create a new fully protected areas, they need to know how those areas are in terms of coral cover, or in terms of coral diversity, of fish biomass, all of this kind of stuff. So I think this is really important for decision making.
I think it's very important to decision making, especially also for planning, right? For if Indonesia, we have some of the projects that are called nationally strategic projects, and these projects get top priority. Like nothing can stand in the way of these kinds of projects. So we can use that data not only for public officials but also us as as the public. We need to be able to understand that, oh, if you're doing a project here near the coast and then you put a label as a nationally strategic project, how is that beneficial to us, the public benefit, right? Like the public benefit aspect of it. So yeah, I think it's very important in the bigger picture. For the bigger picture thing. Yeah.
I actually had something to add to this question because I recently just spoke with someone working in the Canary Islands. And this is not necessarily exclusive to reefs, but it has to do with like marine protected areas and projects being done in them. Is that sometimes governments will rely on environmental impact assessments, and sometimes those environmental impact assessments will be like really out of date by, you know, several years or more. And so looking into, you know, that environmental impact assessment, was one conducted, when was it conducted, those kinds of things do influence policy. The case that I'm thinking of specifically is in the Tenorasca marine protected area, and the gentleman involved in this story, the activist involved in the story, documented a certain number of endangered species in the waters, which eventually was partly why the government in Tenerife shut down a port project. So yes, it's really important for making decisions like that. I just wanted to highlight that for folks, that it is really important. Another question. This is a really good one from Kevin. And Kevin asks, for Brenda, what role can local i'a restoration have for reef and shoreline health? How about Limu? I'm going to put his question up on the screen so people can see it.
I'm glad Kevin asked this. So the area that I work in at Kua actually is with a network of folks restoring traditional fish ponds here in the islands. And for those practitioners, what they really love to uplift is that those traditional structures elevated and amplified what was happening naturally in estuary areas where freshwater was meeting the shoreline. And we talk about lokoi'a as kind of elevating the function of that estuary and nursery habitat. And limu is a word for native seaweed here in Hawaii. So I think what he's trying to, what he's like hoping to share about is that man-made innovations in indigenous communities often increase the abundance of resources, and it's through the active management and stewardship of places and of resources that can then lead to really great outcomes to natural areas outside of those physical boundaries. And through growing networks of indigenous aquaculture practitioners across the Pacific, we've seen that philosophy across the Pacific, and I'm sure in other places too, in other indigenous coastal communities, the caretaking and stewardship and actual like engineering of habitat to maintain and even increase the health and abundance of natural resources. So just locally as an example of that practice and philosophy.
Thanks so much for sharing, Brenda. This is a really good question from again from Climate Spotlight. What are some recommendations to deal with eco-anxiety on local communities caused by the loss of coral? And I think this gentleman's name is Marco Lopez from Hopkins, Belize.
I'll jump in. So in addition to the fish pond network that I work with, we work with two other networks of community groups in Hawaii that are working to steward the resources of their places. And we found that over time, their ability to connect with each other across geographic isolation, living on different islands, that emotional connection to each other, to know that they're not working in isolation on these important issues, really is so valuable, and sometimes not measurable, but that their ability to encourage each other and uplift each other, and know that there are so many people across Hawaii and now across the world that they know value and are working towards the same things. I think that's what carries people through a lot of the grief that comes with doing this work.
And Basten or Israel, did you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I could add some thoughts. I think that we need to recognize the hope spots that we have in the world. So not everything is bad. We have some really good hope spots probably in all the world. So that's something that can help to build an ecological literacy with hope. So I think that's an important point. And the other thing is that probably you need to get involved in other kind of projects that are not just the assessment, but actually some proactive action. So maybe restoration, small restoration programs. If you can see signs of recovery, that could get some hope to you, right? And then maybe the involvement with other communities and the participation and all these collaboration between different groups could help, because if we share our feelings, then other people could have the same at the same time, right? So I think that's good.
Thank you, Israel.
Yeah, so I guess from a journalism point of view, there's something that we call solutions journalism, right? And these are the type of stories that are being pushed to showcase great solutions, great actual long-term solutions that have long-term benefits as well. So yeah, maybe expose yourself to those kinds of stories as well, to maybe reduce some of the anxieties, because but I think going back to my previous point about the youth, I think talking to them, I see them as like, and seeing them as seeing them being excited about the environmental issues, I feel like that's already a good, what I call a balm to heal the wound a little bit. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. And this is from Kevin, and Kevin asks, is there a role for greater community-based journalism in place-based reef restoration? Are journalism schools touching on this kind of reporting? I'm going to put his question up on the screen so you can all see it. And this might be a good one for you, Basten, to address.
Sure. So I'm actually in the middle of an exchange program about journalism, about investigation and research. But the biggest takeaway that I've learned so far is the fact that a lot of these journalists are trying to go back to their communities, right? And by simply just talking to them about what journalists do. Because a lot of the people, they don't understand what journalists do. And so, and I feel like that also adds to the increased lack of media trust. And so when we share stories about solutions about reef restorations, and they must think about like, oh, are these just not greenwashing projects or something like that? So yeah, I think to the second question, are journalism school touching on this kind of reporting? Unfortunately, in Indonesia, not yet. But I also just learned that in California, there's a mandate or a law that requires media literacy in schools for kids in 12th grade. And I was so inspired by that. I feel like Indonesia could benefit from a law like that. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Basten. Those are wonderful insights. I think that is gonna wrap us up for today. I really want to say, thank you to all of your great questions, audience. These are really really good lines of inquiry. And panelists, thank you so much for joining. We're like in 4 completely different parts of the world here, and so I'm just grateful that we were all able to come together to talk about this really important topic. So thank you for joining. I just want to say to the audience watching right now, if you missed any of this webinar, we will publish it on our YouTube channel pretty much immediately after this is over, but I will edit the broadcast and include timestamps and also resources later. And if you registered for this webinar, you'll receive an email that will give you a publication link. If you want to follow along with our webinar series, I really do encourage you to subscribe to our webinar newsletter, which you can do by going to mongabay.com and then find the button that says newsletter on the upper right side of the page. And you can actually subscribe to our webinar newsletter there. But you can also just follow us here on YouTube or on LinkedIn, where we're broadcasting this. So I also do recommend that you follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn and Threads and Mastodon, where we also post announcements and updates about our webinar offerings. So thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you all at the next one, hopefully. Thank you.